Something I've heard time and time again from filmmakers and tutorials is that before you can make an awesome movie, you have to make a whole bunch of really crappy ones first. So with that in mind, this is how I made my first crappy film and the things I learned from it. Lesson 1, have a backup plan. So back in May of this year, I went to visit some family in Spain, and I figured it would be a great opportunity for me to put into practice some of the filmmaking skills that I've learned, as well as kind of get to know my camera and learn how to use it. My mum lives in an amazing location. There's lots of like desert-like landscapes and a dry riverbed with these really towering cliffs on each side of it with caves and stuff, really dramatic and very beautiful. And it's perfect for filmmaking. I had a vague idea for a short sci-fi film about a guy walking in the desert who finds an artifact in a cave which traps him in a time loop. Pretty basic sci-fi stuff. Should be pretty simple to execute, right? Wrong. Problem was that when I arrived, I found that the location had had an unusual amount of rainfall in the last few days. And so it meant that the dry riverbed was actually a wet riverbed. Which meant that I didn't have access to some of the areas that were kind of key to the plot of the short sci-fi that I planned. So I had to go back to the drawing board a little bit. So I figured I could still make a time loop movie, but this time it would be about a guy who's stuck in this time loop, repeating the same day over and over and over until he just loses his mind and jumps off a bridge. Cheery stuff, right? I didn't have a narrative of such, but I had a loose idea of what I wanted to happen. So I just went out and shot a bunch of scenes and scenarios, and figured I'd sort of piece those together when I got home and sort of create a narrative from that. It's a bit of a backwards way of doing it, but I figured I could make something work. And even if I couldn't, it was still a great opportunity to practice. So when I got the footage home and loaded it all up in a timeline and sort of started to piece it together, I found that writing the narrative turned out to be much harder than I thought it would be, for reasons which I'll go into later. Lesson 2, check your exposure and your white balance. The main objective for me on this trip was to get to know my mirrorless camera and start to understand how it works. Having mostly used smartphones to shoot my videos up to this point, I was pretty overwhelmed by just how complex mirrorless cameras are in comparison to using smartphones. And it was quite scary at first, but I decided I needed to overcome this fear. So I'd done a bunch of research on YouTube and practiced a bit at home and out and about, but I really wanted something I could get my teeth into. So this was a great opportunity. One of the problems I had was that the screen was really difficult to see because I was shooting mostly out in bright daylight, some of the hottest parts of the day. So it was really difficult to kind of see what was going on to get the exposure right. I'd set up each shot as best I could and try and get the composition as good as I can get it. And then just press record and kind of hope for the best. I totally forgot to check the white balance, which meant that I ended up with lots of mismatched footage when I got back to the studio. And a lot of them were just overexposed and terrible. And I still ended up using some of those clips, but it's kind of why I had to sort of grade it and colour correct it quite aggressively, and which is why it's kind of got a bit of a stylised, kind of oversaturated look to hide a multitude of sins. And back then I was relying on the exposure meter on the back of the camera to kind of tell me whether I was overexposed or not. But I've since learned that that's actually a pretty useless tool on a Sony camera. And I've learned other ways of checking exposure using zebras and stuff like that, which has been really helpful on the stuff that I've done since. But I didn't know that for this project, so it all looks like a bag of shit. Which brings me to lesson 3. Take the time to check your footage. Because I was making this film on my own, I was essentially the director and the camera operator and the actor. All those things rolled into one, so it was kind of difficult to sort of focus on any one thing, particularly because I was aware of the time ticking away. I wasn't out there for that long, and I wanted to get as much stuff shot as I possibly could, so I kind of rushed it, which meant that I didn't really check the footage. I was relying on autofocus for quite a lot of this, and there are points where the focus is just on the wrong part of the scene, which is a bit annoying. And I wish I'd spotted that when I checked the footage, but I wasn't looking for that. I was just making sure that I'd captured it, And on a few shots, I ended up with a horrible blue lens flare that I hadn't really noticed on playback or during the filming. And those were just pretty much unusable in most cases. There's one where it was unavoidable, and I'm really embarrassed about it, but it's there. It's always going to be there.
haunting me.
So yeah, that's a big lesson. Just take the time to check that stuff. Since then, on the projects I've worked on, I've been making sure that I do that. So if I've had to reshoot something, I've been able to reshoot it mostly. Lesson 4: getting the right people to help. Most of the shots for this film were done on sticks, on a tripod, but there are a few occasions where the handheld approach worked out much better. And for that, I enlisted the help of my brother Lee, who I actually went out there with. So I dragged him out all the way up to this broken bridge in the middle of the day, the hottest part of the day, and sort of showed him the kind of composition that I needed, showed him how to work the camera roughly, and kind of went from there. We took a bunch of shots and I picked the best one in post. He'd only ever really used a smartphone on a gimbal before, so this was something entirely different. But he actually did a pretty good job, all things considered. But what I found was that I kind of knew that he didn't want to be there. As much as he went out of his way, fair play to him. He got up and he came out with me and he helped me shoot this thing. But I could tell that he didn't really want to be there. He wanted to be back home relaxing, which is fair enough because it was his holiday and I was the one that was behaving like an idiot running around in the sun. But he came and helped me out anyway, which shows what kind of a brother he is. But at the same time, because I knew that he didn't want to be there, it made me sort of a little bit anxious, and it made me rush through shots, and made me say, "Oh yeah, that'll do," more than I should have. It's not about that'll do. It's like keep going until you get it right. But I've learned from that if I want to be comfortable on a shoot, or as comfortable as I can be on a shoot, I need to know that everyone is as invested in the project as I am. Even if we've all got different points of view, that's great because that's positive collaboration. But everyone needs to want to be there. So that was little bit of a lesson. And also when I got back, I gave the project to my son Noah to do the soundscape. Noah studied exactly this for 3 years at university, so he really knows his stuff. And so I gave it to him, thinking I'll chuck him 50 quid. He'll be happy to help his dad out with the project. Well, actually, something I hadn't considered was the fact that Noah's now got a full-time job, and he's got a very busy life. And in the end, it was 6 months before I got the soundscape back, which was disappointing for me at the time because, I wanted this YouTube channel to be a kind of a chronological kind of order of, a progression of me getting better each thing I make, and before I could put this film out, I'd already made a couple of other projects which were much better in lots and lots of ways, and now I'm putting up this film after those, and it kind of just feels like I've taken a step back. I know that's not how it is, but anyway, can't have it always. But again, if this was a big project that was costing money, then it would have made more sense for me to have gone to someone else, someone who does it professionally. Because they're going to be more invested and they're going to have the time to dedicate to getting the job done, and we'll be able to work to a deadline. So I guess in future that's the kind of thing that I'm going to need to pay out for, but that's okay, lesson learned. But having said that, I only paid him 50 quid, and it wasn't until I got it back that I kind of realised just how much work I was asking of him. Because I'd recorded no audio whatsoever when I filmed this, so he had to make everything from scratch. And not only that, I was blown away with the attention that he paid to the storytelling itself. There's a part where you see me sort of a montage of me walking off into the distance, and it's getting to a point in that narrative where it starts to talk about isolation. And as it draws toward that point where I'm this tiny speck in this huge wilderness, and I start talking about this isolation thing, Noah's kind of like tapered all the sound effects, all the sounds of crickets and stuff like that. He's just subtly just brought it right down so that it comes to nothing at that point, and it really, really highlights the message in that part of the narrative. So I was blown away by little things like that, and there's loads of stuff like that in there. So he did an amazing job, really, and I shouldn't be moaning about it taking 6 months, but it's a lesson I learned. That's the point of me saying this. I really do appreciate all of the work that those guys put in for like next to nothing. So thanks, guys. I love you. Lesson 5. Write about what you know. When I brought the footage home and started editing it together and putting it into a kind of a chronological sequence, I began to see a disturbing pattern emerge. on a personal level. So depression is kind of a big deal in my life. I've struggled with it for years, and seeing myself acting in this sort of destructive manner was a little bit of a shock. It was like seeing myself go through a particularly bad bout of depression, but through someone else's eyes, and that was a little bit scary. And to be honest, I stepped away from the project for about 3 weeks. I didn't go near it, and I told myself that the footage was rubbish. There was nothing I could use, and it was at least I got the practice out of it. But after a few weeks, I was in a better place and just felt a bit stronger to kind of look at that stuff again. And at this point, when I looked at it again, I suddenly knew where I needed to take the story, what the story was about. It wasn't about a time loop, it's about depression, But it meant that, now that I was writing about something that I understood or didn't understand, but something I've had a lot of experience with, something that I know, then it began to take on more depth and more meaning because I was emotionally invested in it too now. And that made all the difference, I think. So those are the lessons I took away from making my first crappy movie. But it's not all bad, despite its mistakes and flaws. I'm actually quite proud of it. For instance, towards the end of my time in Spain, you can kind of see where I'm starting to get to grips with the camera a little bit more, and starting to get some nicer shots out of it. And I'm quite proud of those, and I'm proud to see the progression that I made even during that short period of time. And also, despite doing things a little bit backward with this one and shooting it first and then writing the narrative, I'm actually really pleased with how the story turned out. And another nice surprise actually is that I entered it into a online film festival called Shortverse. Not expecting to be accepted at all, but kind of hoping for maybe a little bit of feedback as to why it wasn't good enough, and to my surprise, they accepted it. So make of that what you will. That's pretty cool. I'm quite chuffed with that anyway. Before I go, I just want to give a quick mention as well to the music that features on the film. It's from an album called These Revelation Games by Phil Cooper. It's a great album. You should check it out, and I'll put a link to his music in the description of this video. Thank you, Phil, for graciously letting me use your music in my film. Anyway, if you've not seen the film yet, I'll put a link at the end of this video so that you can check it out for yourselves. Let me know what you think. Yep, that would be cool. Please also give us a like and a subscribe if you haven't done so already. That would be really, really helpful. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Cheers.